Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, The Inked Reader. My name is Eva and today I am wrapping up my reads for the month of June 2024, and I just came home from work and I inhaled piadina and no chewing was involved mostly, and so I hope it's not stuck to my teeth basically, because I just had to inhale and sit down to film this before my next meeting. So without further ado, we're gonna go from the least enjoyable read to the most enjoyable read. Overall, this has been like a 3-ish stars month, but there are a couple of things I gave it 4, and there is, I believe, a 5. The first book, it's a highlight of the year, so I was very pleased with that. Before I start speaking about the actual books I finished, let me address the fact that I DNF'd one book, and it's a very popular book. I did DNF Children of Time. This is a sci-fi first contact with alien sort of book. Earth has died, a planet was colonized in the hopes that humans would be able to move there, and then something goes very wrong and there is only one ship with some humans on board remain, and now he's approaching this ship is approaching the planet, trying to make content say, we survived, we are alive, we woke up from our sleep, we would like to land and try to survive, and things starts from there. This happened around 100 pages in, which is mostly where I arrived. I think I read like 130 pages or something like this, and then I just gave up on these. I really disliked the writing. I thought the writing was making this story so bloody boring. I couldn't care less about the creatures that are roaming the planet. I don't want to give any spoilers, so for me it's very difficult to explain. I did explain tiny bit more in my Goodreads review, so I'll link it down below just in case you want to check it out. But I just couldn't find any enthusiasm for this story, and I was so disappointed. Maybe it's because the creatures that roam this planet, which are creatures that we see in everyday life, are particularly disliked by me, or I don't find them that fascinating. Maybe that's why I didn't connect as well as the writing. Something didn't work, and I was literally dragging my feet through this. I had still 400 pages to go, and I was like, I'm not doing this to myself. This is not the kind of sci-fi I probably enjoy, or maybe his writing is really what it's putting me off this. I don't know. Will I reach out to something by this author? I know they wrote other fantasy popular series. I don't know. I might actually never do, unless you tell me that the writing is so different. But yeah, if I have to pinpoint something that really probably didn't work, I wanna say it's the writing, because the plot sounded cool in principle. To be fair though, I really didn't enjoy reading about the creatures anyway. I was like, yeah, okay, like this is a bit absurd, like I can't suspend belief to this point, up to this point. So yeah, give up on that. Now let's move on to the first book I did complete, and unfortunately overall it was a disappointment. I am talking about Slaughter Gods by Tilde Cold Holt, and this is book number 3 in the Hanged God trilogy. This is my Broken Binding edition. It's the first trilogy I received by them, and although they, the pages make Yggdrasil, so I can't get rid of these because I love Norse mythology. I did find book number 2 and 3 overall a disappointment, considering how much I loved book number 1. Now this is just a trilogy, a bunch of characters coming from this small village trying to survive the Christian invasion. So everybody around them has been turned into a Christian. They instead still worship the gods, the Nordic gods, and they want to kind of go on war with people. They don't believe in gods anymore. They want to push them back from their lands because they're trying to conquer everything. And in this world, gods are real, so you follow both humans, you follow gods, and in between. And that's what I loved about the first book. You really follow these characters quite in depth, and every character has its own breadth of pages and its own space to develop. Things do really change in book number 2 and 3, and I believe that the reason is because the agenda becomes too crowded and she didn't have enough pages to display and make this story evolve in a more fluent and comprehensive way. There's just too much going on. It is very rushed, and unfortunately she does tell you a lot of the stuff that happened rather than show you. And I definitely think that this could have benefited way more from way more shown to us rather than told. So for example, you might build up these epic confrontation between a god and a creature, and the whole book mentions it's coming, they're gonna face each other on this piece of land, they're gonna face each other, only one's gonna survive, maybe. And then that combat happens and we are not told, apart from, oh, they found the body of, so they must have fought. What? Sorry, what? You built up the whole thing around them meeting and having this last throwdown, and you don't show the actual throwdown? So that is what happens in this a lot. I think she takes Norse mythology and she goes into so much details, so I've learned a lot about Norse mythology from these, but to the point of sacrificing the actual plot to show us those events happening. And yeah, it was just a pity overall. I did not mind the end, what happens to the characters. I was still happy that I've got a sort of conclusion. I did find though that some characters were kind of pointless. What was the point of Finn in this? Like, what? Why would you have such a large cast of characters when really you didn't need to? You could have done with few characters, more explored, and their story actually developed, actually shown to us. Rather than putting a million people in there that make sometimes an appearance. Maybe, you know, have like, I don't know, maybe 20 pages of a character that you had a few chapters in the other books, and then they end up being like, okay, yeah, that's their end, cool. So a lot of potential. I do believe that the author though has a raw, dry writing style that can really be refreshing for some. There is not much embellishment in this at all, and the story does flow very quickly. Like, I've read this chunk of book very quickly because the writing was just simple and straight to the point, which I overall appreciated, and I will pick up more by the author. However, I would be lying to say that this series, unfortunately, after book number 1, goes downhill teeth first. So yeah, take it as you will. I would still suggest at least to try book number 1 though. Then I will have to put A Tempest of Tea, which is the lovely fairy edition, and this is a YA fantasy. I don't know if it's going to be a trilogy or a duology, but you basically follow this bunch of characters that have to arrange a haste to save the place where the main protagonist works. She has got this kind of tea shop that hides other stuff underneath, and now that's been threatened, so she needs to find an object, go on a haste to find this object in order to save her business, to save, you know, her job and her means to life. And I like to keep my synopsis very vague, because at the end of the day you have a fantasy world with a haste in it and a bunch of creatures, of which vampires are quite prominent. Now this had a weak start and middle. It was weak, I think, although her writing makes up for it because it's so lovely. In terms of plot and characterization, which characterization is probably, you know, the biggest critique I have about these, there wasn't much to it. Like, I was not particularly invested. Must be said that I don't like haste books. At least I can say, okay, maybe it's better say I've never found a book about heist, how you pronounce it, that worked for me. And so when I knew that this was about heist, didn't intrigue me at all. I was just though curious to read something that many people were talking about, and also I had this lovely copy and I felt like it would go to waste for me to just put it on the shelf without giving it a try. And ultimately I'm very happy I did, because the end sparkled interest in me. I was like, oh, I'm gonna read the next one, just because she did a lot with this ending. A lot of things that come from the heist actually provided us with the right setting to then, for the end, and all the twists and turns to happen. So although the heist is still my least favorite part of this, I can't deny that it was fundamental in bringing the story to its culmination and conclusion. That, yeah, sparked my interest and said, okay, I will definitely pick up the next one. And yeah, lovely writing. Let's see, it is a YA, it reads as a YA. I think this is definitely one of those that it's for younger readers, but I was hooked by the end, and I do generally want to know what happens next. Then I have listened to this Butter Honey Pig Bread, and this is a book that came up with my book club, so I reached out to it because it was the peak of a book club for July. And I found this on Script, so I was able to listen to it, and it was a lovely experience. The narrator is very, very skilled, so I had an amazing time. And if you have Script, I would suggest maybe reach out to the audiobook of this. This is a literature fiction, contemporary story. You follow a mother and her two twins. They have to navigate a trauma that happened in the childhood of the twins, but also quite a traumatic life of a mother, and how this has now divided them, both physically in the sense of how much distance they put between each other, and emotionally. And now they're all coming together to their house in Lagos, and they need to spend some time together. They are looking to kind of reconnect, and it's the story of exploring the trauma and how they reconnect and how they move forward from it. And I really appreciated this story. I think for our debut it was wonderfully written, and the experience again of listening to these, the descriptions of food that were so rich. Please read this when you have food at a reachable distance, because it will make you hungry. I really loved the exploration of grief and of trauma, and I liked how it didn't shy away from showing how trauma can also cause people that are impacted by it to blame each other to such deep levels, and the exploration of that blame, the exploration of how two people that witness or experience a trauma grew apart because of it, and if they ever can reconnect, how can they do so. There was an element of magic realism, if you want, from the mother's story, which I found quite fascinating. I really loved all the characters, and for again, it's a genre that I don't reach out much for, so that is why I'm so grateful with my book club, because it gives me an occasion to pick up books that otherwise I tend to kind of steer clear of, just because they don't necessarily pique my interest, or I've not read much about the genre, so I'm quite new and hesitant of picking up something. But yeah, it was brilliantly written. I would definitely say if you like literature fiction, should be on your radar. Overall, a very solid 4 stars. I think the bit of fatigue I felt at times was generally because I'm not used to the genre, and so it holds my interest differently than what I'm usually used to. But it was short as well, so it wasn't like very much of a commitment. I'm looking forward to discuss this with my book club. Next up, we had an initial runner for a 5 stars that then eventually decreased by the end, but we have A Feather So Black, and again, this is a stunning Fairyloot edition. I try to keep up with my Fairyloot editions just because otherwise I feel like I'm paying for these beautiful editions, but I don't really pay the amount of time, attention and time that they deserve. So I try to kind of keep up, and this is the first book in a series. I know that there is another book coming out for sure, so I don't know if it's a duology or whether it's gonna be. This is a Fae story, and you follow the main protagonist, Fia. Fia is a changeling. She has been left in the place of a princess when she was around 7 to 8 years old. The princess has been taken by the Fae, brought to their world through a portal, and now Fia has been left there in her stead, as I said, and she has to kind of grow up with this queen who is a very savage, bloodthirsty queen who wants her daughter back. And so when Fia is of age, when she is mature enough, she is now sent to this portal to try and break the curse that's forcing the actual princess to be stuck in that world. And because Fia is Fae herself, she has some magical abilities that probably will make sure that she can cross this portal between the worlds. And she's accompanied by a childhood friend, a prince of another kingdom, who is betrothed to the actual princess. But, and you know this from the start, Fia and this prince, Rogan, I don't think it's pronounced Rogan in the actual, there is a pronunciation guide, but I'm gonna just call him Rogan, okay? Just for the sake of my mental health. And so Rogan and Fia, they grew up together, and Fia and Rogan had a thing when they were younger, before he had to leave for a few years. So now he's back, and they need to go and get his betrothed back, get Fia's sister back, but there are a lot of feelings left there. You know this from the very start. You know that I'm very careful of not giving any spoilers. So this is the setting you find yourself in, and I must say, sorry, my child just came home and there's gonna be noise in the background, but I was just saying, this is the first book about Fae that actually read like I was reading about fae. Like the writing was so exquisite and so ethereal. She made me think I was in the forest with wicked and wonderful things around me, which I loved, and I was so adamant that this would have been a 5 stars. Basically halfway, if not be more, through the book, because I just couldn't stop reading her writing. She also has a beautiful name, Lyra, and I was just enchanted by the atmosphere. This is very atmospheric. It's a very slow burn romance, but it's also slow in and take its time to depict the scenery for you, which I think works very, very well. It's a book where you can breathe, you got time with these characters to really grow attached to them, and I did. So why it's not 5 stars? Fundamentally, I think she developed the story of Fia and Rogan so well, and she really made me feel the angst there and the challenges and the impossibility of it all, that I could never buy into the other love interest that we have. I didn't dislike him. I don't have anything against him. Sounds fascinating and cool, but I was just in the wrong team by the end. I was just loving Rogan and Fia so much that I just couldn't get out of this mental state in which I was rooting for something that I think I shouldn't have been rooting for, if it makes sense. And the end ends up being quite rushed, which I found quite an odd choice, because she had taken such such slow pace throughout the book, and then rushing the end where you really maybe don't want to rush it. I found that was an unfortunate choice. I also ultimately, when I look back, do I want to read more? I think like I've read enough. If that's the direction we are going in, which again, it's her story, she does whatever she wants with it. I might not necessarily want to be on board for, or at least I don't feel like I care that much about reading maybe another 600 pages about what happens next. Maybe I will change my mind, because objectively, do you think I got any choice about purchasing and reading the second book when Fairloot does this with them? I will probably end up purchasing it and reading it, and I hope that everything will be redeemed in my eyes. I hope I will love and see things from a different perspective. But I end up giving it 4 stars. It's still such a good book about fae. It's our main protagonist. She's wicked and loyal in equal measure. She is a great character, but it's so delicately done that it takes time for you to realize that sometimes she does stuff that your normal heroine in a book wouldn't do. Like, you wouldn't look at the main protagonist as so good and true if she was to do the things that Fia does. And yet I adore the Fia. So if you like fae books, I would still recommend you picking this up. You might feel very different about the ships and romantic stuff like that. I bet many will. And it was ultimately a very enchanting story. It was just a great time reading something that I felt like it was just quite unique in the writing style and the depiction of a landscape and all of that. Okay, then I will have to put Mary. I really went back and forth with number 3 and 2, so in terms of enjoyment, just keep in mind that I went back and forth a few times because I couldn't decide which one. Overall, both are a disappointment in terms of my expectations. Mary is a horror novel, and this is about this woman. She is approaching menopause and she starts to see weird things. She can't withstand her own image in the mirror anymore, because every time she looks in the mirror, her face starts to rot and become that of basically a living corpse. And she's terrified. She goes to the GP, doctor, in USA maybe you say, and she's told, well, it's nothing, it's probably just having a bit of a imbalance in your hormones, you'll be fine. But she isn't fine, and there is an opportunity to go and care for her aunt. And because she's very much down her luck, she decided to take the plunge and go and care for this aunt, despite her and her aunt having a horrible relationship for what she could remember. So she goes to this town in the middle of a desert, and very weird things starts to happen. When I say this is a disappointment, please don't take this the wrong way, because in terms of horror, in terms of writing, I think this is a very, very solid book in the genre. I was expecting this to blow my mind as some of my favorite horror had, just because I had built up that kind of expectation by just listening to people talking and praising this, and it didn't live up to that. A couple of things that probably didn't work that well for me are that there are gross and disturbing moments in these. However, they didn't hit me in the chest, or they didn't scare me as other things I've read in the past have. Now, there are two potential reasons for that. One is I grew more thick-skinned when it comes down to horror and grossness and gruesome details, so I don't feel the same impact as I used to when I started initially to read horror, or potentially they didn't work for me because of the reason, maybe because of the setting. The setting also is an element of these that looks it has to do with cults. Just let's leave it there. And I never found cult horror particularly fascinating. You know that kind of movie with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, like Eyes Wide Shut? I liked the movie, but I didn't like about the cult bit of things. Like those kind of movies, the premise of having a cult and a horror setting really never worked for me well. I just don't enjoy as a premise. So the plot, although it came with a bloody ending and I didn't mind it, it didn't please me as I wish it had. Said that, I love what the author does in this. I loved the exploration of a target of women that usually are not mentioned or are not very often protagonists of horror, or not even mention fantasy if you want, which is middle-aged women. And I think he does in the afterwards acknowledge the fact that he is a man writing about something that he has not direct lived experience of, but he does such a nice afterward explaining why he chose to write the book, where the inspiration came from, how he did his research. And it really showed me how you can write about anything you want, even if you don't have lived experience of it, as long as you take your time to explain why, where's the inspiration, how come you decide to do this, and maybe some of the research you've done. And I think I loved how it was very sincere, honest, and also not apologetic, and just say, you know, this is what I felt like writing, these things I've brought to the table. I'm not saying that it's an accurate, perfect representation, but I've heard so many women reviewing these and just saying, you know, how amazing they found this writing and the tasteful way he described women going through that period of their lives. And I really, really appreciated that. And I will definitely check out more by the author. It might be something of a plot of a setting didn't particularly work for me, but it's still around like a 3.75, 4-ish stars. So by no means a bad book. It comes with warning because a lot of people say that this is very gruesome. There are a couple of scenes in it, but I think if you're used to horror, you'll be fine. But yeah, looking forward to maybe try something else and see if maybe a different plot I click more. Number 2, which could have gone in number 3 to be fair. Really not much difference. It's The Poison Song, and ultimately another slight disappointment. So The Poison Song is the last book in a trilogy, and I adored The Ninth Reign, the first book. And the first book is basically finding out the origins, the reasons behind this alien enemy coming to this fantastical world and try to invade every 30 years. And you have humans, but other creatures as well. One is a sort of, I always imagine them like avatar creatures, and some are witches, for example. And the avatar creatures, they kind of have magic tree that provides them with companion beasts. They are very effective in fighting off this alien enemy that routinely comes. But now the tree is dying, no more creatures are born, so they know that enemies are gonna come back eventually. They know that this time they don't have the means to protect themselves. And these avatar creatures are also a dying breed. They are dying of poison by their own greed for human blood. And you follow these 3 characters having to come together to go on this basically research mission on the enemy, and discovering artifacts, discovering dead bodies of enemies, and trying to put together a story for them so that maybe they can find another way, an alternative way to defeat them. And the first book was just phenomenal. I would still recommend this series because of how good the first book was. It does go downhill after, book number 2 was okay-ish, book number 3 is probably my least favorite. I think here the deal is this has a brilliant idea. The concept the concept behind this, it's brilliant. The prose is okay. The characters are nuanced. The characters are very, I cherish them a lot. So I got good characters, and it has a nice development of a plot. I think the ideas are developed, or like, you know, the end goal is good. It's good. I enjoyed the end goal of the story. It somehow, in book number 2 and specifically number 3, lacked the right glue to put all of this together. The writing also becomes slightly worse, in my opinion. It becomes at times cheesy. She does rushes through some points, and especially the final battle, which is something you should have built, you know, the whole trilogy for. It feels very rushed. Some points are told, not shown. Again, this is kind of like a critique I often have. And so you rush through things. Some characters just simply disappear from the pages. You never hear from them again, which in a sense you might say, well, you know, in life you never get all the answers, so you never know everything, you know, how it tidies up perfectly well. But in this case, I didn't feel like it was done on purpose. I think it was just lack of attention from the author perspective. I did like the bittersweet ending. I liked what she does with it. It's just how she gets there. I like it's so difficult because I liked what happens. I don't like how she made it happen. But overall, I'm very glad I finished with this trilogy. I would still recommend it. I think it's a very good trilogy if you're new to fantasy and you want to kind of start branching out, seeing, you know, if it's for you or not. It is adult, but it can be read by young adults / YA if you want. There's a couple of more intimate scenes, but it's by no means overwhelming or anything at all. So it's in the cusp of being YA and adult, in my opinion. Maybe because I'm so used to epic high fantasy, these try to be in that realm, and I don't think succeeds so well because of the writing and execution, but we will see. I will definitely check out more by the author. I might try and reach out for further works rather than go back, because I always hope for development, and maybe, you know, in the next books she will find what is the perfect glue to bring all of those elements that she's good at creating together. And number 1. You have seen my middle year freak out tag. You know what's coming because I said it would be a spoiler. But I have to put The Last Argument of Kings. Now, if my month was okay, these in itself would make my month of reading actually pretty awesome. I loved these, and after feeling lukewarm about book number 1 and 2, when we're like, what is everybody's saying about this man and his writing and his stories? I know he's good, it's okay, I've read another trilogy by him, but I don't see it. Now I'm on board, and I told you it was worth waiting for me. I am on board. I love these to pieces, and describing these, it's basically kind of impossible. No one really gives either a synopsis about the first Law trilogy. It's the first trilogy in a bigger series. There is the first trilogy starting with the Blade itself, I believe it's how it's called, the first one, yes, and then you got 3 standalones, and then there is another trilogy following the descendant of protagonists of the first books in the series. And it's an epic high fantasy, and it's a bit like Game of Thrones in terms of the magic is there, but it feels much more like almost a historical fiction fantasy to certain degrees, where the magic is low. The magic is different than it's not a world full of magic. It's very specific type of magic, and you follow basically this kingdom trying to keep at bay other populations that wants to invade and, you know, reclaim their freedom. And you follow a bunch of different characters. Mostly you don't have too many point of views, probably around 4 in the first book if I remember correctly. And this conclusion, he did everything right. The writing is something else. I get it. I get why it's so loved by so many. I fell in love with his writing. I tapped so many of his passages and quotes, and I really fell in love with the characters. I must say that Dogman and Logan, how you pronounce his name? I always butcher it. Are like in my heart forever. I think this is how you pace a story, this is how you do combats and fights, because his ability also to shift perspective and jump from one perspective and leaving us with our mouth hanging and having them to keep reading because we need to find out, but also we want to find out what happens to the other guy. That's how you keep tension. And I think I feel sorry just to compare it, but I need to. She does this a bit as well, but somehow the stakes are not even comparable. So she jumps perspective, but the build up of these has been so masterfully crafted, and I now believe that the first two books led to this being that awesome. I know that a lot of people don't prefer or enjoy this book as much as they enjoyed others in this first trilogy, and I don't get it. This is hands down 5 stars. Lotka, I don't know how you pronounce it again. I really enjoy him. However, in the end, he threatens someone with something that really left a bitter taste in my mouth, and so I just couldn't. I loved him, but then there was like, so we will see. But I did like what happens to him, and I loved how he looks. I love how he takes these characters and he makes them go through life, and life is tough, and so somehow they have to develop, but also sometimes they're their old self, and it's a mix and a blend. It's not always like, oh, now I'm changed forever, I forget about how I was. No, they're still there. It's very realistic, and that's why probably I love it so much. Even what he does with Jazal, I love the character of Jazal because it's so flawed. It's the character that in a sense develops the most while still being him at all times, and it's just the characterization is something else, the writing is something else. I'm on board, and I immediately went then and I said, like, I need to read Best Served Cold because everybody's obsessed with it, and I really, really hope that in this case the hype doesn't ruin it for me. I've heard like it sounds like a Kill Bill type of revenge style thing, and I'm like, Kill Bill is my favorite thing ever, it's my favorite movie ever, so really, really hope, I really, really hope that he nails it, and I can't wait to continue on. It made me want to drop everything and keep reading, and this is when I know that an author and a book and a series has really worked for me. So sorry it took me so long to get around to reading the last book in the series, but I will never look back. I will never look back. Mr. Abercrombie, I knew you were good because I tried another trilogy by him, as I said, but I never knew how good you could be. Now I know. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what was your favorite read of the month. If you're new, I would love for you to subscribe. If you want to leave a reaction, communicate with me with a comment in the comments down below. I would love to chat with you. I'll see you next time. I hope you take care of yourself. Go well. Ciao!